and show you how God works in our careers and our lives, what his purpose is for us, and why we should trust him with everything that we do. My name is Rita Wilson.
And I'm Sandra Fernandez.
And we are here with Kevin.
Kevin!
Hi, Kevin!
Hello.
Oh my gosh, I didn't even say your last name.
Yeah.
Welcome, Kevin.
That's okay. It's great to be here.
That's
Thank you
awesome.
for joining us.
I talk fairly loud and fairly fast.
That's
And
okay.
so I'm really curious to see what my podcast voice is going to be. Because every podcast
That's the
I
cool
listen
thing
to
is
is
that
slow.
they
and,
can
they could slow you down.
they can adjust you.
So
I love it.
awesome.
Well, thank you for accepting the assignment.
yeah,
I
thanks for
appreciate
inviting
it.
me.
Yes. I was I met Kevin at LCA, and so I was like, talking to him, and then I was just like, something just told me like ask him, and I was like, Kevin, do you want to do a podcast? He's like, what? So we kind of talked through it a little bit. I was like, well, go check it out so you don't think I'm just this crazy black girl asking you to do a podcast. So but I'm so glad you're here. I'm glad you
I
said
think
yes.
it's on every millennial's bucket list to do a podcast
Yes.
before they do. So I can check this off after we're done.
Yes!
And, move on to the skydiving or whatever is after that.
I love it.
So.
Skydiving. Ooh, scary. Tell us a little bit about yourself. What do you like to do for fun? Who is Kevin? Tell us about your family. Let's get to know you a little bit.
Yeah, I obviously I live right here in Layton, Utah,
Mm-hmm.
and my wife and I moved here 10 years ago. I have a master's degree in divinity, and got that through my church's seminary. Felt called to ministry at a very young age,
awesome.
and have been doing ministry since really since I was called at 13. But most people know about me as I'm an avid long distance runner. I ran cross country for my university that I attended. I actually walked onto their team. I didn't get a scholarship or didn't get recruited or anything. I just said, I want to run cross country with you guys. And they said, you have to do all three. And I said, 3? What do you mean 3? Like there's cross country and then there's outdoor track, and I'm not going to do outdoor track. And they said, no, you have to do outdoor track, but we even do this thing called indoor track.
Oh, wow.
And,
Wow.
and so I ended up doing all 3 and setting several school records in all
Look
3
at you.
and winning some cover championships, and it was just great. And then
It's like, no biggie.
yeah,
No
I know.
biggie.
So
I just run forever.
It's just fun. Yeah, I do. I run forever, and so it's not a good thing, though. Other people who tell me they couldn't do it, I'm like, well, don't. Like, no, I can understand that. So it's my thing, and it even drives me crazy. So that's kind of my main kind of hobby I do. I've written some books, but just that's more for fun. Nobody's ever read them. But I used to. So I wrote a time traveling romance novel. True story.
Oh,
Man, I published
this
that
is the
12 years ago.
romance girl here.
Yeah, there you go.
She might read it.
And it was like, it's a typical like novel where the key was he kind of accidentally gets thrown back in time. So it's not like he purposely invents time travel to go back and keep himself from dating this girl. Like he just finds himself in the past one day and thinks, hey, while I'm here and trying to figure out how to get home, I can keep myself from making the worst mistake I ever made. And so that's what the book's about.
Wait, what was his worst mistake ever made?
Yeah.
Well, it was dating this girl that dumped him.
In the future.
In the future.
So now he's in the past.
Yep,
And he's
trying
dating
to-
somebody different and not trying to date that future.
Yeah,
Okay.
and so he's trying to go around in the past and keep his younger
Cool.
self from
being her.
From being her. And and I don't know if I should spoil it all.
No, go
but
ahead.
he fails miserably. Like that was kind
okay.
of the catch in the end is he can't break them up. And so he has to live with his mistakes. He has to live with the regret. And,
Kevin, you need to
and
like
so-
publish this
Okay.
book.
it's
What's this book
published.
called?
It's somewhere between. Look it up on
It's
Amazon.
published. It's just not
It's
read.
just nobody
Rita.
reads it. It's the worst cover in the history of covers. It's a really awful
Okay,
cover.
no, wait. What's the
Let's
book
switch
called?
it up.
It's called Somewhere Between.
Somewhere between, guys.
So,
Where can we find somewhere
it's
between?
on Amazon.
On Amazon.
Yep, Somewhere Between Kevin Lambert will get you that. Those
Okay.
4
Okay,
words will
Kevin
be the first thing that
Lambert.
pops up. So-
Lambert.
Lambert. Yep.
Lambert.
So
And
I did
how
not
we-
come
we
here
take
to
the T out of
promote
things.
that.
I
So-
know. I did not come here to promote that.
I've always wanted to write. I've written at a very young age. I have a little thing. My second grade class voted me most likely to become an author. And I still have that
wow.
certificate signed by my teacher. I love writing. I
love
just
That is
love,
amazing.
I love that. I love running and writing. That's kind of the
I love
two
that.
things.
That's
So,
awesome.
Yeah.
Those are
Wow.
great
Those are
skills.
two things about me.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
That
Do
is
you have any kids?
so beautiful.
Yeah, I have 2 kids. They're 10 and 12. And then we adopted a teenager a couple years ago, and he's in college now. And his name's Grayson, and he's doing really well. Very kind of sad story. he came home one day from school. He was living with his single dad in a third floor apartment in Ogden. And he came home from school and his dad had fallen off of a fire escape and died.
Oh, no.
And we got a call. His mom was kind of in the picture, kind of not in the picture. Unfortunately, had a stepdad that had kind of thrown him out of the house and didn't want him around, which is really sad, isn't it? Like, just heartbreaking. And so she, we knew a friend of a friend. And so that friend kind of worked the grapevine and said, found me and called me one Friday afternoon and said,
wow,
we're going to take this kid in.
Oh,
and
wow.
my wife had just gotten home from work and she'd had an exhausting week and she had fallen asleep on the bed. And and so I had to wait for her to wake up and she's kind of wakes up and she's super groggy and she stumbles into the kitchen and gets a drink of water and I'm leaning against the cabinets being like, when do I bring this up?
Oh, wow.
Tell her.
You're like,
In
babe,
the-
do you want to go adopt a child right now?
Yeah, exactly. Like in the half hour you've been asleep, kind of a lot's happened. And I need to bring you up to date on a lot of stuff, but you also look like you're half awake. And I want to wait for that. So it was,
dying.
yeah. So
I love that
it was
story.
bizarre, but there
what
was
was
no
her
one
reaction,
else, so.
and how did you tell her?
Yeah.
It was really awesome. Like God had been preparing us for it in
Amen.
just so many awesome ways. It really was a God thing.
Yeah.
And so she kind of, once she, finally woke up, I can't remember, like so much had happened in that hour. I can't remember how all that part went down.
Yeah.
But there was kind of this like, okay, like that. I just
She
remember
said-
her
She's
saying that,
okay,
like,
I'm
okay,
going back to
like
bed.
this is where things have been going. Like it's just
Yes.
like the dominoes were in place, and it's like, oh, okay, like
Yeah.
this is where God has been leading us to do.
Wow.
Is take this kid in. So 2 days later,
That's crazy.
he moved in, and he was 15 at the time, and he played it so cool. When I talked to him on the phone, he's
Yeah.
like, I just need a place to stay for a little bit. And I
It's
said,
like he's still
you
his
know,
own human now. He's
Yeah,
like in
he's-
charge of him now.
Yep, and I
Yeah.
just need a place to crash. And I said, Grayson, the bed's yours. We've decided that bed is yours. If you stay in it a week, it's yours. If you stay in it years, it's yours. And he said, okay, it'll probably just be about 3 years. It'll just be a little bit. So
3 years.
just a little bit, just 3 years. So
Yeah.
yeah, is that funny? So
That's awesome.
How was that transition
That's
with
beautiful.
adoption?
So we didn't actually, because he turned 16 really right after that.
Yeah.
The adoption process takes years,
Right.
and not to
Yeah.
mention thousands of dollars. So by the time we had gotten through that, he would have it would have been pointless because he
Been
would have
able to
been
make his
18.
own decision.
Yeah,
anyways.
and so his mom kind of gave us a temporary power of attorney
Okay.
that allowed
Very
us
cool.
to make most decisions in
Yeah.
his life.
I like that.
And so we had to kind of up that with her every 6 months. She had to kind of
Yeah.
re-sign that. And there was some tension and awkwardness there because every 6 months she had this reminder,
Yeah.
of kind of this
Yeah.
very painful relationship she had with her child, which is just rough. I all but compassion for that. But we got through it. We got through that.
Amen.
And so, and he's
With
just
God,
doing really
right?
well.
I
He was at
love
our
it.
house for dinner last night, and we're just really proud of him.
I love
So,
that.
That's awesome.
I love
Yeah.
it. You're a pastor.
Way to be
I
a
am.
vessel.
I am.
Yes.
I pastor a church as well.
Yes.
And
What
so-
church? You do everything.
I do everything.
My
Yeah,
gosh.
I am a
What don't you do, Kevin?
jack of all trades,
Right.
master of none. I really am. And so I just do. Yeah, I don't do anything well, but I do everything
Oh, don't say
everything a
that.
little bit okay. So I did just step down from teaching this week, which was a gift. It really was in the end.
Sometimes it's
Yeah, it would
it's
become
supposed
too
to
much,
happen.
and I'd overstay. I went longer than I should have with that career. It got me through some really difficult, horrible times, and I'm always going to be grateful for
Right.
that.
Amen.
But as we get to kind of the story of Utah, I can unpack a little bit more of that.
Yes.
But yeah, I pastor a small church just down on Rosewood Lane.
Okay.
It's called Rosewood Lane Church of the Nazarene.
Yes.
And I always think that your church should either be named after the city you're in or the street you're on.
Oh, wow.
Because we are the church called to serve the
Right.
community around Rosewood Lane. That's kind of our
Amen.
vision.
Oh, wow.
And
Yeah,
I just love churches like that we
Yeah.
are called to a specific geographical spot and to represent the purposes of God and the kingdom of God
Amen.
to the people living in this kind of
In this area.
however big or small that
Yeah.
area might grow or get to be. And so we're named after the street we're on, Rosewood Lane. And I tell people we're a friendly neighborhood spider church. We're the Spider-Man church. We are there to serve the community and to
Amen.
just be the friendly neighborhood church that people know they can rely upon
Look at
and
God.
turn to and hopefully find Jesus. Yeah,
Yes.
hopefully
Right.
find a wonderful community that is his body,
Yeah.
that's doing things right. And
Yeah.
so,
I love it.
yeah, I've been doing that 10 years and there's been ups and downs for sure. It's not easy pastoring small churches in
Right.
today's
Yeah.
world. It's not easy pastoring big churches either.
Right.
I don't
Yeah.
wanna, but yeah.
I
so,
love that. I love
wonderful
that.
thing.
I love it. That's awesome. I kind of want to know a little bit about you, right? Like know about Kevin. I know, you and your family just kind of like got up and came here to Utah and everything. So just kind of like, what do I always say? Start from birth. Start from
Yeah.
you came out the womb, right?
Yeah.
But, yeah.
Yeah,
Where do you
as
want
I
to
s-
start and start from there?
Yes.
Yes.
As I said earlier, I first kind of articulated that I felt called to ministry when I was
Yeah.
13.
13.
And
wow.
that was when I was driving home from church in the car with my mom.
Mm-hmm.
And my mom's response was, "Don't tell your dad." So not because my dad's not a wonderful, faithful, devout Christian, because he knew how hard it would be on pastors.
Oh.
And it was hard for him to reconcile that his son would go through all
Wanna
this.
be a
Like he
pastor.
just knew how
Was
difficult it was.
your dad
so.
in ministry?
I was
as
gonna
well?
say.
No,
Okay.
my dad was the head usher at our church,
Okay.
and he had, he had helped with a lot of things. My dad has been burned by the church a lot. In fact, right after that moment, my dad got burned by the church pretty badly that we were part of, and he's never quite. Well, I shouldn't say that. There's some hope right now, but
Right.
yeah, he's really struggled since then with that.
Yeah.
So between 13 and really when I was 19, I just struggled with whether or not I was. It wasn't something like we say about ministry, if God is calling you to it, it would be dumb not to do it. If God isn't calling you to it, it'd be dumb to do it, right? Like that's ministry. It's the
Yes.
worst job in the world unless God called you to it.
Amen.
And then you shouldn't be doing anything else, And so
Nothing.
I wrestled just in high school with it, just on and off, on and off. Some months I'd tell people, yeah, I'm going to be a pastor. And the next month I'd be like, yeah, I'm going to own my own publishing company. That was my other goal.
Yeah.
And so I went to college and declared a business and English major so I could start my own publishing company. That was what I wanted to do. And so my freshman year, I that's what I was, as business and English. And I declared in October that year, I moved myself to a religion major for like 2 weeks before switching back to that. So I didn't take any classes. I just changed it on a form and then 2 weeks changed it back. But that was enough to get me on the religion department's mailing list, the ministry department's mailing list. And in April, I got an email from a church in northern Idaho that runs a children's camp. And they said, we need a children's ministry intern. And I'd been teaching children's Sunday school and helping out with my church's children's ministry. And I thought that'd be a really fun summer job. And so I applied and I got it. They gave it to me. And within, 3 weeks of being up there, I
You
just
were like,
knew.
this is it.
Yeah, I just knew. And everybody in that church knew too. It's fine. They'd only known me 3 weeks. And they're like, you have the gifting and calling for this. They're just a wonderfully affirmational church. People I'm still friends with to this day. And a huge part of that was the summer camp was beautiful because it was kind of half really good church kids, just from really great families. As I said, people I'm friends with to this day. One of them's actually running the camp now. He's grown up and is running it, which is cool. And then the other half was kind of foster kids and neighborhood kids, what we call neighborhood kids in the church. And they were great too, obviously, because kids are great, but there was a lot of trauma there. And particularly with kind of a couple kids, a few things happened that summer that were just tragic. I'm not sure I could say on your podcast without you guys having up the rating, but some really awful things that as a suburban Christian kid I'd been sheltered from.
Right.
Yeah.
And as I was unpacking that with the lead pastor, I said, I just didn't know that kids were going through horrible things like this.
Yeah.
I just had no idea. And he said, and you want to be a business major? And that night I rode my bike to a park down the street from that church, just a little neighborhood, pocket park. And I climbed up onto the tallest level of the playground and looked at the stars and said, okay, God, like I have to go into ministry. Like, you're right. Yep. I got to do this.
Yeah.
So
That was the that was like,
the yes.
I'm going to accept the assignment,
Yeah.
Lord.
Yes.
Yep. I'm gonna accept my marching orders, if you will. Like, yeah, I gotta do this. And so I went back home and I changed my major, and it's been a fun, wild ride. So
Yeah.
I moved to Kansas City, and my wife. That was right after I got married, and my wife was gonna work full time. And I was planning on helping out coaching cross country somewhere, and then just plowing through my master's degree. I just wanted to get it done and then move back to the Northwest, right? Where God's country are, where we have those beautiful mountains outside.
Right.
And within the first weekend, right after we moved to Kansas City, within days, I connected with an old friend who had also moved there, and he worked at a homeless shelter.
Oh, wow.
And so, so I was like, oh, I wouldn't mind working at a homeless shelter. That sounds fun. And so he got me a job there. And I did that for the 3 years while I was getting my degree, and it was the best job ever. So much fun.
My gosh, the type of people that walked in there.
Oh,
their
yeah.
stories, that must have been life-changing just by itself.
Yeah. And I told people working kind of middle upper class children's ministry, you have these parents who are just great to work with. And then you have these parents who are very needy, but very kind of laudatory, right? These people that they love you and they support you, but man, then when they call you on the phone, what do they want? What do they want now? What do they need now? And then you have people that aren't as great to work with. And then I go to a homeless shelter and I meet these homeless guys, and some of them are the best people ever to work with. Aww. And some of them are great, but they're needy. And some of them are not so great. And I thought, people are people.
Right.
People are just people.
Right.
Yeah, they're just, whether you're poor or rich or whatever your life circumstance is, people are people.
Right.
Yeah.
Sorry to cut you off. What did the experience in the homeless shelter do for you? Like, what did you gain from that?
I mean, so much. Just perspective, more perspective on what people were going through. I have a friend, a good friend to this day. We haven't connected in a little bit, but his name was Robert. Exactly my age, born a month before me, completely different life story. And it was interesting talking to him, and I was only 25, 26 at the time. And it was interesting talking to him about the 26 years of my life compared to the 26 years of his life. And I thought, how did all this happen in your life? Like, I was chilling at college, having fun, toilet papering dorms, and, and like, staying up late watching movies and doing homework and reading books. And he had some military background in that. And so he'd been through 2 or 3 wives somehow in that time or so, relationships, And so there's just a lot of perspective there with kind of people. So that was a lot of it. A lot of it was just maturity and growing up and realizing how this world could be. A lot of compassion, though. A lot of hurt I had for guys that, this was in the middle of the Great Recession. And so we did see a lot of guys who their homelessness was no fault of their own. Right. They just had been dealt a bad hand and the economy crashed at the wrong time. Right. And so many guys in those 3 years would say, I never thought I'd be in a place like this. Oh, wow. And I would look at them and say, but for the grace of God, me too. Like, I could end up like you. Like, we think that it's not going to happen
to us, right?
Yeah. Still in America, we think homelessness is your fault. And some people it is. That's why it's such a persistent myth, is because we can all point to someone that, you can make better life decisions. Yeah. But
because it's a choice.
It's a choice.
Yeah. There's so many people that end up homeless through no fault of their own. The good news is we can spin them back on their feet pretty fast. Those groups we can spin back on their feet really quick. So I used to say, and I still say, homelessness, it's never all your fault, but it's never all not your fault. And so, but some people it's 90% not their fault, and some people it's 90% their fault, so working with each individual situation and learning those stories and perspectives and things like that.
It's funny that you said that, because when I came from Africa, right, like I just couldn't process why there was poor people. And like, I seriously could not process it, because I'm like, in Africa, when there's no food, there's no grocery store. Like, we're in the middle of the bush, you know what I'm saying? There's no rain, there's no crops, so we're all like struggling, and then when I come here and see that there's homeless people on the street, but there's places that they can go, or they have the opportunity to just kind of like get themselves like out of that situation. Like, I just couldn't process it. And my mother had to sit me down and say, you got to understand that the war we went through was hard, but that person could be going through like a mental war, right? Like that drug addiction or that depression, like that is war to them. Like, it's unfortunate that we went through that, but you got to understand that they are struggling just as much. So you can't compare that either. You have to have compassion and love them, because you don't know how they got there, right? Or what their situation is. And that completely changed my perspective, because I was just like, why are you on the street? What? There's food here, Like I just couldn't process it, but And just like you said, like sometimes it's your fault and sometimes it's not. And that's where the perspective comes from, right? Sometimes we don't understand why things are happening, but we're also not willing to be like, okay, you know what? I don't know. It could be, right? And then we just judge, right? And so I really like that you said that.
Yeah, you gotta find out their stories. And oftentimes in America, it's a lack of community. They don't have the family.
Oof,
they don't have.
deep.
They really are orphaned, even though they're 60-year-old men. They really are orphaned.
Right.
And so part of our goal with that rescue mission, at least at that time, and I'm pretty sure that's continued, is we use the word interdependence. And I really love that word. Instead of moving people towards independence, in a sense, they were independent. And that's what caused their poverty, is they were completely independent of all the structures they needed to thrive. Right. And so we wanted to talk about interdependence, meaning we want to build a community around you. And we want you to be an equal part of this community, both giving and receiving in equal measure. Amen. And I loved that.
That's deep.
I've come to say
that's actually very powerful.
I'm like, wow.
Yeah. There's the it's not me, it was their word. So if I sounded but I've come to say
it sounds good.
yeah, it does, doesn't it? So I've come to say like there's the old saying, if you teach a man to fish, or if you give a man a fish, you feed him for a day. If you teach him to fish, you feed him for a lifetime. Right. So when I talk about kind of compassionate ministries in a church and what we're trying to do, I talk about three things. One is we do sometimes just have to give someone a fish. At my church, people are like, I need food. Like they need food now, and you can't make good decisions on an empty stomach. Right. You just can't make good life. You can't.
Babe, are you listening? Where he at? No.
Yeah, you just can't. You need that basic low-level hierarchy of needs. You need food. You need shelter to make good decisions and to pull yourself out. So sometimes we do have to give someone a fish. Right. And then obviously we want to teach people how to fish. Obviously we want to teach people how to do better and educate people about how to get along in our systems and structures. Yeah. Here I get a little bit controversial because I have some reservations about the American systems and structures right now. And there's a lot of just, inequality in them, and I don't like that, and it's not, and so, yes, we need to work to change systems and structures, but while we do that, we do need to be teaching people about those systems and structures, and here's how to get ahead, and here's where the loopholes are in the system and structure, and here's how to kind of manage that and get along well. So we got to teach people that. We got to be doing that work as a church. I love that. And then the third thing, though, I think is where we become Christian. Right. And I always tell people, if we do the first two, we're actually really good pagans, and then we're good, and we are. I don't hear that just because I use the word pagan. That we're still doing good, but that's not really Christian, because Christianity is about fishing together. Amen. And so we're really not doing the full work of compassion unless we are fishing together, unless we're doing the work together, and we are equal partners in this, and we are friends. And I have a close friend of mine. He's not homeless, but he lives in a single studio apartment in Ogden, and places where people don't really like to live. It's not a place where a lot of people like to be. He's lived there for years. He's been a professional waiter. He's 60 years old, and he's a waiter, and he's just been a waiter his whole life. He's waited at Olive Garden and at Texas Roadhouse, and now he's working at one of the sub shops. And we eat together 2 or 3 times a month. We get together, and I can tell you what he has done for me is so much more than anything I've done for him. Like just the way he's given me hope, the way he's taught me about what it truly means to be a follower of Jesus, his attitude through some just really awful situations in his life, just his optimism. That's what interdependence looks like.
Look at that.
Is I'm not trying to help him, and he's not trying to help me, but man, we're helping each other. You guys are helping each other. Ooh. Yeah, and I'm a better Christian.
Can we
and
say
a better
that
pastor.
for the people in the back?
Yeah.
The one person back.
The one person back.
The cameraman. So.
I love it. Jerry, you've been picked on a lot lately, huh?
I know, yeah.
I love it. That's awesome.
Well, thank you.
I love that. That's beautiful.
I love the whole concept of interdependence. Let's go back to that.
Yes.
Because I love that you focus on that at your church, but it's also, that really is what God is calling us to do, even in our relationship with Him, right? Because we all want to be independent. We all want to be 21, 18, 16, all of those ages to have more independence, right? But really, in a relationship with Christ, whenever we do have that independence from God, that's where we like
Go
will
ahead.
run ourselves into a homeless situation.
Right.
You
Yeah.
know, and that's when God is trying to teach us, like, depend on me. You know what I mean? Like, we want to be independent, but really it's about growing more dependent on him. And that's what I learned, you know, like, I wanted to be independent. Don't tell me what to do. Like, and I'm still like that, you know, like if somebody's like, you need to do this, I'm like, excuse me, what?
Yeah, I'm going the other way.
Girl, what?
To spite you.
Don't
Yeah.
tell me what to do. But like, it does. Inside of me, it's a little bit of a cringe moment. But I do take a step back and I'm like, all right, let me process this. But I do know that every single time I have been like, you know what, Lord, I got this. You take a back seat. Like, I'll drive you. You know, we will drive ourselves into those walls.
Just destruction.
Yeah. And then, like you said, it's not like you plan on being homeless, you know?
Yeah.
But things will happen. And again, like you said, part of it is a choice. And there's always consequences for our choices and the decisions that we make in life. And anyways, I love that word.
Yeah, that's
Interdependence.
awesome. I love it.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a
love it.
beautiful thing. If I can add maybe another metaphor,
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
if this podcast is about saying the quiet parts out loud, I sometimes just, you need time to yourself. And
Yeah.
when you have 3 kids and a wife and you're doing all the things I mentioned doing earlier, I sometimes just love it when my wife leaves town because then it's like I can get a little bit of time to myself. Even if she leaves the kids with me, it's like, you guys are going to bed at 7:30.
Yeah.
I need a minute.
I'm gonna sit and watch my action movies or play my video, right? So, and
love it.
that's always nice for 24 hours.
Right.
And then I realized that like I'm not doing anything without my wife in town that I wouldn't be doing if she was in town. You know, like, and so it is so tempting to think, I don't need this community, and that this community is actually tying me down or weighting me down, especially where you're like, I have the personality where I just like to go. I just like to blaze forward and dash in. I'm one of those people that rushes in where angels fear to tread. And I think God is up in heaven, being like, oh, go get him again. He telling the angels like,
You went the wrong way.
Yeah. Oh, go see if you can go. Good luck. Go catch him. So I'm one of those people. I just barge in, and so, but it's tempting to think, oh, these people are tying me down and they're weighting me down.
Right.
But really, they're not. They're there for God gave us each other.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because
Such
you
a
need that
good way.
balance
We
in
do.
your life
God
too.
gave us each
So.
other. I love that. I love that. So after the homeless shelter,
Yeah.
happened?
And that's a huge part of my story I actually kind of wanted to share today is I was like 3 months into that and I was thinking, I'm doing this the rest of my life. This is just so much fun and this is what God's called
Can
me
I
to do.
just say that takes a lot
And
to work
so-
at a homeless shelter? I
It
worked at a
does.
shelter for a little. I didn't
Yeah.
work there. I volunteered there, but I was there.
I worked.
Girl. That's how I know it takes a good, kind person. But like,
This girl.
it's hard. It's hard. It's a lot of emotions, a lot
Yeah.
of mental. It's a lot. So that says a lot.
Just
about
to even
you.
go volunteer
to
there, I
say
struggle.
Yeah.
I was having a blast because
like, it
it's
was
hard.
fun.
It was
Yeah.
hard.
And it was a job where 90% of the time it was just great, but 10% of the time it made up for the 90%. Like there were some awful things that happened and things I had to deal with. And I wasn't a chaplain. I was the manager. And that's the hard job because you're the bad guy.
Yeah.
And I'm not good at being the bad guy. I've gotten better at it over the years, but I don't want to get better at it. I'm going to go back to being the good guy. And so I was the one who got to assign all the beds. I had to enforce all the rules. I had to tell the guys that we didn't have beds for. We don't have a bed for you tonight.
And that's hard, turning people away.
Yeah, and if someone came in drunk, I was the one that had to say we can't have people drunk in here because it's a small, cramped spot.
Yeah.
It was not a big kind of open, kind of big thing. So, those things were not fun. So
Right.
there was the 10% that was awful, but most of the time it was really just wonderful. So I was 3 months into that. And thinking, yeah, this is what I'm going to do. I found my calling. And I took my first class of seminary. I hadn't even taken it. And the teacher divided us up into groups and sent us to local churches around the area to interview pastors and ask them what it was like being a pastor and kind of the nuances of their place, which is a common thing to do in pastor education. It's like one of the things you do, which is great. And we were sent to this poor couple that had been thrown into what we call a buzzsaw church, meaning everything that goes whole comes out the other side in pieces. Just a really difficult.
Situation.
just a rough church where just a lot of rough things had happened in that church's life, and the people were just not doing it. And the pastor's wife joined us, and I don't think he even knew that she was going to join us for this like dinner that we did with them. And he was trying to be pastoral and diplomatic about, well, yeah, this happened, but here's how I tried to deal with it. And she was not. She was burnt out.
I'm going
she was
to
bad.
tell you how I feel.
Yeah. She's like, I'm going to tell you about all these people and the hell they put my family through, right? And so, and what's funny is I think the other 3 or 4 people that were part of that dinner, they thought, I'm going to go work homeless ministry with Kevin, right? That's probably what they were thinking. And I just heard God say in that, like, no, like I heard God say, this is where I'm sending you.
Ooh.
Like I am sending you into these churches.
That is deep.
And and
wow.
right around that, I mean, it's 2009, I think. So right around then, the numbers of the attendance numbers of churches in America had started to really plummet. That was kind of in that 5-year period, church attendance numbers in the United States had really started to show some steep declines. And I went to a very healthy church. Even in Kansas City, I went to a healthy, great church, and I grew up at some healthy, great churches in Boise, Idaho. So I hadn't seen it. Like I hadn't seen bad churches. My professors in my undergrad degree had told me about bad churches. But I'd never experienced it. Ooh. And I realized sitting there talking to this couple, like, this is where the church is dying. Like, it's not the big churches. It's not kind of the mega churches. Yeah. It's the small neighborhood churches.
God's like, I'm going to take you so you can help lift.
Yeah.
I love it.
Those kind of churches. Yes. And I just felt a deep heart and like compassion for trying to help these small churches out.
I love that.
What you find is that small churches... And we actually have a lady in our denomination that's done a lot of research on this, written a lot of books. Her name's Deborah White Smith. If you wanted to look up some of her stuff, she has a website. I think you could Google her name and find her. But small churches together are still a pretty powerful engine. They disciple their kids a lot better than bigger churches do. And most kids that grow up going to a small church actually keep going to church compared to larger churches. Oh, wow. A lot of kids in larger churches don't keep going to church after they graduate high school. So that's one thing. We disciple better. Obviously, we provide more of those interdependence outcomes we were talking about earlier. So we're better friends. We hold each other accountable personable. Better. We provide for each other
It's like
better.
a little family.
Yeah, it's like a little family. And so if small churches are dying, then we're in trouble in America. And that's kind of what Deborah White Smith has said, the woman I mentioned earlier. She's kind of done some great work saying, if small churches are dying, we're in a lot of trouble. And so I just had this huge heart suddenly that I'm going to be a small church pastor. And 3 years later, I'm graduating seminary, and the rescue mission is offering me kind of a promotion and a full-time job to being kind of the lead manager. And I'm thinking about taking it. And I got a phone call one night about this tiny little church in Nowhere, Oregon, in kind of the northwest corner of Oregon. And they've gone through about 7 pastor interviews or something like that. And they finally got down to my resume. God. And so I heard someone say a few weeks ago, referring to something else, he said, they reached the bottom of the barrel and that guy said no. So then they called me, right? That was kind of the situation there.
Like, Kevin?
And so then they've
don't
been
say
through...
that. It's funny, but don't say that.
Yeah, I shouldn't say that. Yeah. So they had been through an awful situation, just 17 years of just an awful situation. And I walked in expecting the church that couple had told me about, and they were not that way at all. Just wonderful, kind, caring people.
You saw something different.
Yeah, they just were just the most amazing people to work with.
Look at that.
And I kind of waited for the honeymoon to end, and it just never did. And so there were some hard things that happened there too, of course. But just wonderful people. Just they loved their community so much, and they just wanted so much good. And it was one of those small towns that it's the guns flow as freely as the alcohol, and those are not a good mix. And so there's just a lot of just drugs through that. The SWAT team broke apart a drug lab right across the street from the elementary school in that town. The first month I was there, I was walking home from church, and there's all these SWAT guys in the bushes, and I'm like, oh, well, okay, I'll just keep walking, So
don't get me, I'm walking.
Yeah, and so a lot of these people just loved their town, and they just wanted, like what I said earlier, they wanted to see the kingdom of God come to that town. And they wanted to see people get over alcoholism and get over some of the things that were tying them down. And so wonderful time working with them. And then a few years in, I always kind of went in knowing I'd be a transitional pastor for them.
Transitional.
And so, meaning I wanted to get them back on their feet, get them healed from kind of the awful things they'd been through. And so my wife and I wanted to move back towards the urban, suburban type spot. And we looked at Spokane and Portland and Seattle, and then maybe Boise. I grew up in Boise, didn't really want to go back there, but we would have if God called, of course. And it didn't even occur to me that people lived down here in Salt Lake City.
Oh my God.
So I've joked for years.
You're like, what village is that?
Wait a minute.
I've joked for years. I knew the LDS lived down here.
Yeah.
People live down here.
Yeah.
So, that's kind of been my joke. But met a friend at a retreat we were at in Idaho, and he had been down here 3 or 4 years at that point, and he was sharing with me about he's down in central Salt Lake City in Rose Park, and so he's in a neighborhood where 127 languages are spoken.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And
Rose
and so he was just sharing with me, people think that Salt Lake City is just a bunch of white people, but it's not. It's a very diverse community, and there is a lot of poverty there. People think it's a bunch of wealthy people, and it's not. There is a bunch of poverty there, and things to do. And he had just entered into doing some awesome things down in that neighborhood. And he said in that conversation, he said, I keep waiting for God to give someone the heart for Utah. And I went home and said to my wife, I said, I think we should go to Utah. I think we should go to Salt Lake City. And my wife said, no, of course we're not going to do that. And I looked at her.
She's like, you're wrong this time.
Yeah, you're wrong. And I looked at her and I said, you're right. What was I thinking? You're right. And I go, no, you're right. Why would I? Yeah. What were we thinking? And so we both prayed about it. And the next day I found myself calling our district superintendent and saying, hey, I hear Layton's open. You mind sending him my resume?
And so
he
you
said,
knew it after that night.
I just knew we were going there. So it just wasn't ever in question. So I came down here and got to work. It was another small church that had just been so beat up. And one of the things with small churches, once again, this comes from Deborah White Smith. She calls them foster kids. It's like raising a foster kid, something I've experienced doing, because they are grateful that you're there.
Yeah.
They really are grateful that somebody took them in and that somebody's there. But they also don't trust you.
Right.
And they know you're not going to stick around long.
Right.
And they kind of like, we're going to put up with this person until, they either get tired of us and leave or before, I think that foster care metaphor is so good. And I wish I would have come up with it myself.
And the fact that God already put you
so
in
deep.
that situation to foster
Yes.
a
Because
child
you've been
is
there.
so
Yeah.
powerful.
I love that.
Yeah. And so, and they made life hard on me for the first couple of years because they just didn't trust me. They didn't know if they liked me. There was another kind of interim pastor who had been part of them and had kind of, actually 2 interim pastors, one they liked a little bit more than the other, and she was still there. And so they kind of were like, she's our pastor, and we don't really need you. We're willing to let you live in our parsonage, and we're willing to pay your paycheck, but we don't really want you, we really don't need you, doing much else. And so I that drove me crazy. Like I felt guilty because like, you're letting me live in your parsonage, you're giving me a paycheck, but you won't let me lead you.
But
And
you don't want me.
I would call people and say, let's get coffee this week. And they'd say, no, not this week. And I'm like, well, can we get it next week? And we'll let you know. That was everybody in the church. It just drove me crazy.
Well, and I think we have the perception that pastors stay in the big churches. You know what I'm saying? Like the ones that are good. So I can understand why the people are kind of timid because they're like, are you really here for us? Are you going to leave to go to something bigger? Or are you going to stay here if you have that? I can understand that feeling. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Are we your stepladder
Right,
church? Are we the wrong that gets you to the next
that gets
level?
you to the big, the big guy or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. And I just let them know as much as I could during those first years. And I mean, even in the last 10, that I am going nowhere.
I'm here for you.
I'm going nowhere.
That's so powerful.
God called me to Utah, and
Yes.
I look at that as just step under my marital vows, right?
Yes.
Until God says go somewhere else.
Right.
I
am staying.
I'm here. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes,
I'm here 'cause
Lord.
This isn't a 2 or 3 year project.
Amen.
This is a lifetime project. So that we're working on.
I love it.
That is
Yeah.
so awesome. And I love that you help the small churches because I started my walk in a small church.
Yes, you did.
And that was beyond the most powerful, most growth, that's where I learned about
You
God.
learn a lot. Yeah.
How old were you?
20. 21.
Oh, awesome.
21.
And how'd you get connected to it?
So I met the pastor for that church. I met him through my son's dad at the time, and he was actually coaching him on business stuff. And through them, they went to a dinner, and he's like, oh, like, I'll bring my wife, you bring your significant other. And so we ended up going to dinner, and that's how I met them officially. And so he was always inviting me to church, and I was like, nah, like, I'm like, thanks, but like, yeah, like, we'll go sometime, you know. And one day, he got my son's dad got really sick, and I just remember thinking like, oh, you know what, Lord, if you save him, you know those prayers.
Yeah.
Like,
I would never.
I was like, I'm gonna go to church this weekend. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I did, and I went to church, and from that moment forward, it was like
That was it.
there was that hook, and
Yes.
when I tell you, there was 5 people in the church, 5,
Really?
Wow.
and I personally think that church was just meant to be there. It's no longer there, but it really just, when I tell you, he poured everything he knew into me. He poured everything into me that he knew, and he literally, and he says this, I say it, but he almost feels like a spiritual father to me. I didn't grow up with once my mom got married, I grew up with my stepdad, right? But until then, like, I hadn't grown up with a dad, and even my stepdad and my relationship, it's a little bit different, but and I love him to pieces, but he's just not like, he was always like, those are your kids, these are my kids, you raise yours, I'll raise mine, like, keep it simple, keep it separate, you know? And so, anyways, when I met him, he really took me in like a daughter and poured everything he knew into me, and he taught me who to hold on to, you know? And he was like, you're lost. Come to church. I'm going to show you what you need to know, and I'm going to point you in the direction you need to go, right? And I really needed that in that moment. And so, anyways, when I tell you, like, what I know now, and, like, even this whole business, all of it is because of a small church, you know what I mean? And obviously because of God and the work that he did through the pastors and through that church, you know, but it was that one-on-one, very intimate, personal relationship.
That's big.
Yeah, that's awesome. 5 people.
beautiful.
So
5 people.
The story of our church is we had gotten down to 5 people, and there was a guy in our church who the district wanted to talk about closing the church, and he basically said, over my dead body, right? Like, and that was an act of prayer on him. He just said, he would tell you, I prayed and prayed, and I wanted to leave, and I wanted to close it down because there was so much just hurt and bitterness that had happened in that situation. Right. And he's a guy who would absorb that, you know, who would absorb that bitterness, and had in many ways. And he'd tell you, God just never released me. God never said to let that church close down. And so he kept it open, basically paying the bills out of his own pocket.
Look at that.
And the funny thing there is we had a family move from LA up to Utah, and they were in our church of the Nazarene, and wonderful Hispanic family, and also from Mexico, and they had 3 young kids. I think the youngest was either not born yet, or or just newborn. And he met them at the door and said, "I'm really flattered you guys are here, but you don't want to come to this church."
Ooh.
And and I know other churches in the area. Yeah, I know other churches in the area that just have awesome families and awesome kids your age. And if you would meet Paola, she's still part of our church. She said, "This is our church."
Oh.
Like, no, like, what are you talking about? Like, this is our church, and we're going to go to this church. And so, and I could only imagine.
I know, you might not know, but I'm coming in.
Yeah, but this is my church now. So, so in 1 week they went from 5 to 10, and so, and now we're still just running about 20, 30. And it's been, COVID was, hurt all of us in many ways. But we have this core group that just as healthy as can be and wonderful as can be, which we didn't have when I first started pastoring there. And just, there's just some neat spiritual growth that's happened. And so it's been a journey, but yeah, it's been fun.
Amazing. Kevin,
highs and lows.
That is
So,
really cool.
yeah.
And that takes such heart to manage people, to help people, to lead people, you know, because sometimes like you got to stay good with you and God, you know, like
Right.
you got to really, because sometimes I feel like even in serving, you know,
Yes.
we get so caught up in serving that we really take God out of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you will run yourself into a wall, and then before you know it, you're bitter, you're depressed, you don't like the people.
Yeah.
You know, the people God called you to, you're like,
You're
take
like-
them away.
Yeah.
Take them away. Yeah, so that's really amazing that you're able to do that. And
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
just speaks
Powerful.
volumes.
And there was, oh man, was it 2 or 3 year period where that guy I just told you about, I realized I just can't talk to him because every time I talked to him, he would just be very critical, or
Yeah.
he would just, and that's because of his own hurt. Like he'd been hurt by so many
Yeah.
pastors
That's
before.
what happens.
And I hated it. And I hated it because in a small church, you know who the pastor's talking to and who
Right.
the pastor's avoiding. You
Right.
can't
Okay,
you can't get away.
that is
with-
so real. I remember one time the pastor said something, and he's like, "There's only 4 of us here." I was like, "Not me."
You're like, who is it? It's the pastor's nomination. Yeah.
I was like, "Oh
Yeah.
my gosh, that's exactly what happened."
Yeah.
And he's like, "Yeah." I just remember one time he did say that.
You're like,
And I was like, "Hide." But that is
Awesome.
so
so my
true.
whole church
So
knows that
true.
we're not talking to each other. We're not just avoiding him. Like you can't.
So
But
true.
I wasn't doing it out of a sense of bitterness or anger with him.
Yeah.
I mean, part of it was I you know, like when you're about to preach a sermon, you don't want somebody to pull you aside and tell you everything you said wrong last week. You know, so that was some
Right.
of it.
Or
It
even
was
be like, "Were you talking about me?"
Yeah,
You know?
exactly.
It's like,
Oh
I
my
mean,
God.
there was only 3 people that God is
You
speaking
said
to here,
something.
and so
Yeah.
he's talking to somebody.
So, but
Yeah.
I also had the self-awareness to realize that I was annoying him. I was just annoying him by
Yeah.
trying to be so aggressively friendly with
Friendly.
him.
Right.
With a
Okay.
guy that just isn't
Yes.
that way. And
Right.
so
Yeah.
I am like I one of my strengths is kind of what we call woo. Like I like meeting people and I
Right.
like discovering new things. I like making
Yeah.
friends, and I can come off very strong. And I think that kind of really, rubbed him the wrong way.
Yeah, and there's people that need you to like ease into their life, not
Exactly.
just bulldoze.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so one Sunday morning, I literally, like right after my birthday, I think, right in late August, I had a woman come into my office at 8 a.m. one Sunday morning and just tell me, my husband and I decided last night we're not going to come back to this church. Which, if you're going to quit a church, 8 a.m. on a Sunday morning is not like, that's a good
Yeah.
Tuesday conversation, where I can handle it maybe a little bit better. I mean, and it was just, it came out of nowhere. And it wasn't that she was mad or bitter or anything. You know, she had moved to Utah from out of town, and she had put on our church such great expectations that we just could not do for her because of her last church. Her last church had literally saved her, like saved her life, not just
Yeah.
saved her soul. Like she, like what you were talking about with
Yeah.
your church, like. And so it just came out of nowhere though. I did not expect that for her just to do that, and so I just my thoughts spiraled. I couldn't be together, and I should have just left and not come back. I should have had my associate pastor preach that day. I did leave and walk around the neighborhood a couple times and talk it out with God, and kind of get to myself back to a place where I thought I was okay to go back and kind of just finish the Sunday. And that's always my weakness, is I'll think, okay, I can do this, right? 'Cause I want to do do this. That's who I am. I'm a doer.
Yeah.
And so I came back, and my daughter and one of the other kids in the church talked out loud, like as you and I are talking right now, through my entire pastoral prayer. And everybody in the church could hear them. So I finally said, "We are praying," just so loudly.
Yeah.
And I wanted to whisper it, and it did not come across as a
Yeah.
whisper. And so then that happens. And then I said in my prayer something about, God, I want you to forgive us our sins because we are so sinful. Because we have sinned against you, and obviously that did come from a heart of frustration
Right.
with this, and so the next Wednesday I pull up to the church to do some things, and there's a truck at the back of our field. We have a big field that we own behind our church, and there's a truck back there, and I don't know whose truck it is, and so I'm like, who's back there raking leaves or doing whatever back there? So I started to walk back there, and it was him. It was Ben. His name's Ben, the older guy. And right about the time I'm about to turn around and go back, when I realize it's him, he turns and sees me, and we're standing,
You're like,
You're like,
I
oh, now I have to say hi.
And so I
Yeah.
said, just made small talk. What are you doing? And he said, oh, they asked me to come rake up all these leaves. And I wasn't really doing anything. So I offered to do it. And I said, oh, okay. Really appreciate you doing that. That means a lot to me that you're out here doing it. Let me know if you need anything or any help at all. And I turn to leave, and he does the thing he always does. He says, well, I was meaning to ask you about something. And you just know you're about to get it. And so I turn around like, oh, here we go again. And I said, what? And he said, do you really think we're all sinful, even the children? And like, which first of all, it's not what I said on Sunday at all. And so do you really think, we're all evil sinners and, something like that? And, that's the way he comes at you. And I said, well, let me be honest with you, Ben. I'll just be honest with you. Sunday morning, somebody came into our church and told us they weren't coming back. And his whole demeanor changed because he had actually had to go through that with so many people when our church dropped down to 5 people. Like he had that experience of every Sunday coming in and somebody else had left. And tears welled up in his eyes. And he said, oh, who was it? And suddenly everything between us was good. But
It's
that took 5 years.
Vulnerability
Yup.
and that openness.
Yeah.
It's so powerful.
Yeah,
That
but
is
it
a
took
moment
5
like that
years.
this
It
week,
took us
yeah.
5 years to get to that part. And
Yeah.
even then, from then on out, things weren't great. There was one morning shortly after that, maybe the next year, where I saw him pacing in front of my office because I knew he wanted to come in and just, let me have it about something
Give
that
you
I
one.
said. But at least he was having the self-awareness to be like,
Yeah.
should I, right? Like I could and I was just laughing, sitting at my computer, just kind of glancing up at him, like he's just paying.
What have you learned through
love
your
it.
relationship with this man? Do you feel like God has taught you anything in about yourself, about people, because of this relationship with this individual?
I mean, yeah, quite a bit.
Yeah.
Obviously, we all do. I internalized a lot of his frustration with me. Even if, up here in my
Yeah.
frontal lobe, I knew that he'd been hurt.
Yeah.
That he'd been hurt by so many other pastors. And honestly, from what I understand, he got along really well with the pastor before me. And sometimes it's worse when the pastor you like leaves.
Yeah.
But sometimes that does more damage than the pastor
Yeah.
you don't like flaming out in some big moral failure, right? Which had happened in our church. But yeah, so up front, I knew this isn't really about me
Right.
per se, but it was so hard to convince yourself of that.
Yeah.
Just to
Well,
convince
because we're of
yourself.
the flesh, and we just we're
Yeah.
getting attacked, so
Yeah, exactly. And it's a tense relationship,
Right.
and I'm
Right.
trying to manage things. I mean, this is the guy who, God saved our church, but God used him to save our church, right? This is
Amen.
the guy who, when it was down to 5, kept this thing open. And for that, I always had this incredible amount of gratitude for him.
Yes.
But that gratitude made it worse because it's like, why can't I get along with him?
Right.
Because I'm
Yes.
so grateful for him. And why
Yes.
is that not coming through in all our
That's so
interactions?
yes.
I like that.
And it was so frustrating. And then the second thing I kind of found out is his wife and him had kind of an on off again. Their relationship was a little bit
struggle.
tense, and there was home tension things there that also
adds up.
weren't about me.
Right.
And the reason why I ask this is just because there are those people in our lives, whether they have that hard outer shell, but then inside they're actually really just want love. They
Yeah.
really do just want, and they want to show that
Are you
as
talking
well.
about me?
And there's only 4 people in the room, Rita. No, but I personally have had those experiences with people where I'm like, Lord, take them away.
Yeah.
I'm done. Take them
Yeah.
away.
Exactly.
But like you said, it's like there's loyalty there, and there's so
Yeah.
much things. And the way that God has showed me a mirror of because there are people that God will clear out, right? But then there's those people that he won't.
He won't.
Yep.
And those are the people that sometimes he allows you to see yourself in them.
Amen.
He allows you to see the compassion for them. And he's got a bigger plan for their life too. And like you said, sometimes it's not even about us. Sometimes they're not, they take it out on us, but it's not about us, right? And I just think those are the people that really teach us something without us or them knowing that they're really teaching us something until the Lord just really reveals that to you, and you're
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and then
powerful.
and then one day like you said, one day it kind of just starts clicking, and then the relationship starts to bloom and to flourish from there. But I've definitely had those experiences.
Well, and that's the thing, and why churches are struggling right now. Is because we live in a if you don't like it, leave it culture, like a vote with your feet
oh my
culture.
gosh, Kevin!
And it's so hard because small churches are so awkward. Like they are. Like I pastor one, and
people are just go leave.
Exactly.
If I don't like something, if I don't know,
let me just leave my marriage.
I'm
it's not working.
Yeah, people just leave, and you know, and I am guilty too. I mean, and this week, without sharing too much, I was guilty. I stayed somewhere longer than I should have. You know, I will stick it out. That's something that's how we are. I just will do. And so I am guilty of the other extreme, where sometimes God's like, you need to get out of there, and I'm like, no, I'm good, fine, it's fine, it's fine, I'm good, I'm fine. It's like you're on fire. It's like it's fine. You're burning. Does it hurt? Yeah, it hurts. It hurts, but I can handle the pain, right? And so I am guilty of the other extreme, but small churches are just struggling right now because there's not many people willing to put in 5 years with a very difficult person and or even with a pastor they don't like. And he, you know, I did finally get to the point, and this really helped in that kind of relationship where I realized I just realized like there are some really awful pastors this church has had, and he is still here, and so why do I think I'm driving him away? Like he's not because that's a fear too. He's gonna storm out and leave, and but I finally realized
I've been here, I'm staying here.
Yeah, I've been. This is my church.
You're gonna leave.
This is my church. You're so you know there's just not many people like him left in the world where we're just gonna stick this out and. 5 people down, and it's been an awful year for our church, but I'm keeping it open.
I love it.
Because so I wish people would stick with small churches because it is awkward. It is tough.
Well, and God sticks with us. Think about how many times y'all have messed up. He's still there.
It's a God who sticks with us.
He sticks with us.
Yeah. And now as I said, there's the other side that a lot of churches are toxic. And the couple I told you about earlier, they didn't make it pretty much a year after that they had left that church. So there is a time to leave too. And so you just have to enter into a lot of prayer and discernment on that. And
God will put you in the right place.
So
and
so
Kevin, this is awesome.
Well,
I'm really
I'm
cool,
enjoying
Kevin.
it. So I enjoy gushing about the church. I really do believe in the church. I just still do. And I've been through a lot, and there are days where, and I'm not saying this profanely at all, I have said, God, what in the hell happened to your church? Like why did we let so much from hell climb up into your body? Like, why is this here?
It's the cracks. It's the stuff we're letting slip through
it's
the
letting
cracks.
slip
Don't
in.
make me preach about the cracks.
And it gets in, and it's
true.
like, you guys are, you're doing Satan's work for him
Right.
down there. So I just,
Wait a minute.
I do get frustrated with the church, but that frustration comes from just a high idealism for the church. I heard it once said, and maybe you guys have heard this, that the church is Jesus's bride. So don't go knocking the bride because the husband's coming back.
Right.
And so he's a jealous groom.
I like that.
So,
you know what? I think it's very important to keep the standard in the church, you know, and to raise the bar and continue to raise it, because sometimes we get too comfortable, you know, but in all reality, we shouldn't be comfortable. We should continue to be growing. And that's what we should be seeing in the churches too. It's just the growth, you know, and not to be in the same place 15, 20, 30 years later, still needing salvation.
Right.
Like at that point, we need to be stronger in the faith, eating solid food, you know, and
wrestling with deeper issues.
Right. Right. It means we're not getting fed what we need to still be in that same position.
Yeah.
We're not supposed to be. It is about growth. I like that, girl.
Yeah.
What's going on with you today? What were you going to say? Sorry.
Oh, just that one of the issues I had to deal with in both my churches, every pastor of a pastor church big and small has to deal with, is just the music team, right? And one of the things that I've kind of gotten a little bit kind of picky about is that the music team is not the worship team, because worship is everything you do
Amen.
on your Sunday. Like worship is the sermon, it's communion,
Where you walk,
it's even the announcements. Even the announcements are such a big part of worship, because it's like, here are how we are going to take what God has given us here and bring it out into our lives in the communities. And so even the dumb little announcements are part of it.
Yeah.
So so that's one thing I kind of like. The worship service is the whole service. It's the sermon, it's the prayer, it's it's the scripture readings. And but one thing I've had to deal with music teams, which we all do, is they want the music to sound good. And I get that. I want it to sound good too.
Right.
We passed around this morning. There's an awful rendition of "Oh Holy Night" that we passed around this morning and laughed at. I don't want our music to sound like that. So one of the comments on that YouTube video, it said, "This guy gets the Guinness Book World Record for singing the most keys at the same time." Right? So it was just, I don't want us to sound like that. And some church music teams do sound like that. But the problem that happens with that is, like, things can get really tense with your music team. Things can get really toxic really fast, because you're the reason we don't sound good, and you just can't get this together. And
It's not
and
about
then
that.
they bring their interpersonal relationships in too.
It's not about that.
And whether they like each other. And so I had to say till I was blue in the face, like, how we treat each other is
Amen.
worship. That is what worship is. It's treating
we
each
treat
other
each
well.
other.
How we sound is superfluous.
Right.
And I can tell you guys, I have sat with bands that weren't talented at all, but man, they liked each other and they were having a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And
was
that's
probably more powerful.
more powerful and more worshipful than people who are extremely talented who aren't having any fun, and you can tell they do not like each other.
Right.
And so that's you sound better when you like each other.
Right.
And so I'm like, if you want to sound good, just like each other and do that work.
like each other.
And so,
Yes.
but yeah, so that's one example of where we just have to stick it out together and work hard at those relationships and keep the main thing, which is love, right?
Yeah.
That's the main thing according to Jesus. So
Love it.
Kevin, thank
I
you
love
so much
it.
for all the nuggets
Yes.
today. They were really good. Really,
this has
really
been
good.
delightful.
Yes.
Really
Yes.
good.
So last words for our viewers and listeners. If you had to leave them with anything, what would it be?
I would say find a good church. I think that's what this has been about, right? And so, but find a good one. I'm not saying just find one. And I'm saying find one that's a good fit for you. Find one that's the right fit. I really do believe you need the church. I do believe Christians need the church. I heard a pastor say a few years ago, she said, people ask me, can you still be a Christian and not go to church? And she said, theoretically, hypothetically, yeah. But I don't know if I could.
Ooh.
And I've always thought, and when I heard that, I'm like, ooh, that's how I feel too. Right?
That
like,
hit deep,
I would not be as good a Christian as I am. I'm not saying I'm a good one without my body of believers and without the bodies of believers that I have worshiped with for the 40 years of my life.
Amen.
They have made me who I am, for better or for worse.
I love it.
So find a good church. It's the most important thing I think you can do. To grow and to get overcome life's barriers. So.
Yeah.
Thank you,
I
Kevin.
love that. Thank you so much,
This
Kevin.
has been delightful.
Yes.
So.
It's been great having you on the show.
It's been awesome. All right, guys, remember to be bold.
Be brave and be better.
Goodbye.
Say it.
I was going to say it with you, but I forgot it. So
Oh, no, man. Okay, we can redo it. Do you want to redo it? Let's
Can we
redo
do
it. So she'll say be bold.
You'll say
No,
be
you
brave,
say
and then
remember to be bold, be brave.
And then all three of us will
Say be better.
Okay,
Perfect.
there we go.
Okay, you ready? All right, guys. Remember to be bold
Be brave and
And
be
be
better.
better.